The Silk Road, a single legendary highway stretching from China to Rome, camel caravans trekking the entire distance, one continuous road linking two ancient superpowers. Except, none of that is quite true. There was no single road. Most merchants never travelled more than a fraction of the route, and the name itself wasn't even used in ancient times. It was invented by a German geographer in 1877, nearly 2,000 years after the trade began. Here's the myth-busting part. The term Silk Road was coined by Ferdinand von Richthofen, a German geographer, while he was pitching a railway project connecting China to Europe. He actually used the plural, Silk Roads, because he understood it wasn't one path, but a sprawling, branching network. The ancients themselves never had a name for it at all. What Richthofen described in the 19th century was a system that had already existed in fragments for well over 1,000 years, but the Silk Road, as a single continuous corridor, is largely a modern invention layered onto a much messier historical reality. So if it wasn't one road, what was it? It was a relay system. Almost no merchant travelled the full distance from China to the Mediterranean. Instead, goods passed through a chain of hands. A trader in Chang'an would sell silk to a middleman heading towards Central Asia, who'd sell it to another trader at an oasis city like Dunhuang or Samarkand, who'd sell it onward again toward Persia and again toward the Roman world. By the time a bolt of Chinese silk reached a Roman senator's toga, it may have changed hands a dozen times across a dozen different cultures, each one adding a markup. This is why silk was so absurdly expensive by the time it reached Rome, not because of the raw material, but because of how many intermediaries took a cut along the way. And it wasn't just silk. Gold and silver moved east from Rome. Wool, glass, and jade moved in multiple directions. Horses moved west, out of Central Asia. Spices moved out of India. And, just as importantly, ideas moved with the goods. Buddhism spread along these routes, from India into China. Papermaking technology moved west out of China, eventually reaching Europe centuries later. Religions, languages, artistic styles, even diseases travelled this network right alongside the merchandise. Economically, this is one of the first large-scale examples of what we'd now call a multi-hub trade network, not a single supply chain, but an interconnected web where no single actor controlled the whole system, and value was added at every single stop along the way. This network didn't collapse all at once. It eroded gradually as the political and economic landscape shifted around it. For over 1,000 years, various empires, Han China, the Parthians, Rome, later the Mongols, provided just enough stability along different stretches to keep the relay chain functioning. But in 1453, the Ottoman Empire's control over Constantinople effectively closed off the traditional overland routes to European traders, forcing merchants to look for alternatives. This is a genuinely underrated cause and effect in economic history. The closure of the land route is one of the direct pressures that pushed European powers to search for sea routes to Asia instead, a search that led directly to the age of exploration and eventually to Columbus sailing west instead of east. The Silk Road's real lesson isn't about one road. It's about what happens when a trade network has no single point of control. Modern global supply chains work the same way. A smartphone might have components sourced from a dozen countries, assembled in another, and sold in 100 more, each stage adding cost and complexity. The Silk Road proved, 2,000 years before globalization was a word, that distributed multi-hub trade networks are both remarkably resilient. They can survive the fall of any single empire along the route, and remarkably fragile, since closing off even one key choke point can force the entire system to reroute. The Silk Road was never one road. It was a relay of thousands of local trades, stitched together over 1,000 years, moving goods, money, and ideas across the ancient world. Next time, we'll look at how ancient Egypt ran a functioning economy for centuries without using coined money at all. Subscribe if you want to keep tracing how ancient economies really worked.